Okay, so I'm going to start that over. I apologize. Mercury's retrograde. Woo! So everyone that's here live, I appreciate you for coming. Second, for those of you that are watching the recording of this class, welcome to Astrology 2, or I forget exactly what I called it. I do apologize. On the slideshow, it's going to say a completely different name because I did forget to correct that. But I will correct it and resend it to Alex. So this is astrology. I think it was like navigating celestial currents or something like that. Um, yes, and then Honey is the class moderator. Um, okay, and so we will be going into the second part of astrology and understanding astrology, how to utilize the information that we got in the Intro to Astrology course. So this is like a course 2. So we had course 1 already, where we talked about planetary positions, how you interpret them. We talked about why the signs mean what they mean, going into meanings and significations of planets in general, as well as the houses. That was all covered in the Intro to Astrology class, as well as how to read a birth chart in a more comprehensive way. We went over aspects. We went over how to interpret planet positions within houses in the chart, and how to put all of that together basically to be able to read a chart. Um, this course, I'm going to be honest, is going to be a lot of hands-on practice because you already know the base kind of skills of reading charts. This will be essentially still reading charts, but it's just going to be different kinds of charts that we're reading, along with some extra things that will be helpful in interpreting more accurate and artful interpretations. So eventually we'll be learning about like delineations that won't be covered today. But we might, depending on where we get into it, depending on how far we get today, it might be in next week's class. I always have a plan for these classes on how far we'll get, and then it really depends on whether or not we actually achieve that. So let me go ahead and just share our screen. Was anyone, before we get started, was anybody able to see? I know I saw one comment um, on the post that I posted, I think this morning, or it might have been this morning or yesterday, about the moon being in Pisces and how that might relate to your chart, or what maybe you have noticed. Um, does anybody know their chart offhand? Yes, Melissa. Okay, Melissa commented. I really appreciated your comment, Melissa. That was great insight. While we're here, and I am sharing my screen, did anybody else want to add anything? Oh, got it, got it, got it. Well, if you would like to come on the mic, you can. If not, that's okay too. But I am going to go ahead and share my screen here, and then we're going to start the slideshow.
I'll comment.
Okay.
Um, okay, my Pisces is in my seventh house, and I know lately, like yesterday and today, I've been like irrationally emotional, and
Mhm.
I've kind of been aiming it at people that I don't mean to. I've been trying to control that. So, um, as far as what was the questions again?
It was just like one, where is Pisces in your chart? And then what are some things that you could attribute to Pisces and like the moon being in Pisces to kind of how it might have affected people around you or yourself? Either one.
Okay. Well, I've also noticed that people around me are yesterday and today are a bit calmer than normal. Like
Okay.
one person has been a bit combative as of
Mhm.
late, and she's really chilled out. So that's nice.
Okay.
And Pisces is like the land of dreams and everything, so that fits well.
Yeah, super zen. I like that. Um, awesome. Okay. Yeah, so we will be continuing. If everybody can mute themselves on the mute their mics, we will go ahead and get into it. So this is the second course of the astrology course. We have a little bit of an agenda. We have a PowerPoint instead of worksheets. So I won't be doing like the actual worksheets like I did, just to save some paper. If you choose to print out the PowerPoints, um, that's great. More power to you. But now you don't have to because you can just have the PowerPoint. Um, so we'll have vocabulary. A lot of students asked that I provide a vocabulary list. And while I did provide a vocabulary list in this course, I will be honest with you, I don't use half this astrology vocab, to be honest, because I'm more of a person like as long as I know what I'm talking about or like what something does, then I'm like, who cares about the word for it? But that's just maybe me. um just kind of like as a person, that's just kind of how I think about things. But if you would like the definitions on paper so you know what I'm talking about, that is what this is here for. You do not have to use this vocabulary at all. If you want to use it all the time, that is also your prerogative. So we'll have a bit of a review, not a lot, but a little bit of a review. We'll be talking more about the outer planets. In the Intro to Astrology course, we talked about um, the planets from the sun going to Saturn, and we worked with those a lot. We did talk about the outer planets a little bit, but we are going to start using them a lot more often um, as we get into transits and as we also get into like things like solar returns, perfection years, delineation is a little bit of that. Delineation, not so much because it has more so to do with the houses, but they could still be added in there. Um, but the outer planets will play more of a part in this course in particular. We'll, of course, be talking about transits today. And if we get if we're able to get to it, we'll talk about transits and how to loop that in with your birth chart. And so that's why I asked that question about the moon in Pisces today, because we'll be doing that with all of the planets um, in this course, but in particular today. So we do have some practice questions. I'll do a bit of a demo as well, but let's go ahead and get into this review. So the review, welcome to astrology. Ignore that old that old title. That's not what it's called anymore. um I think it was, yeah, I do think it was called Navigating Celestial Currents. Let's review what we learned so far. We learned the building blocks of astrology, or the GEMs, the gems of astrology. So that's gender, element, and modes of astrology. So the two genders are feminine and masculine. We could also name that as active and passive. I was actually thinking about this yesterday, especially with Mars and us just being in a lot of Mars energy right now, with the solar eclipse in Aries coming up on Monday. I was thinking about that and I was like, when someone is like, I think a better way to, I don't know if it's better for everybody, but I thought it was a nice way to kind of think of things, especially as we are reminded of how a planet can express itself in the masculine and feminine way, is to think about, like, in particular with Mars. If someone is angry, if you have a room full of people and you have two different ways of expressing anger. You'll have people that are very open and honest about how they feel. Maybe they actively start yelling. They start, flipping things over. They really give it to you and they get it all out right then and there. But then there will be those people that say nothing. They just hold it in. Um they really maybe even and they possibly like press down anger. They might really hold on to that anger because it was never expressed, so they hang on to it for longer than maybe the conversation is going on. They stew in it. And so that could lead to things such as like plotting revenge. It could lead to, some health issues. It could lead to all kinds of things because that anger was not expressed and just let go of. So we've just described the masculine and feminine, or the active and passive expressions of Mars. Think of it that way, because I think that is a good way to think about it, because you could even do that with Mercury. If you did that with the Mercury sign. So kind of, sorry, backing up with that with that example. Um, for those masculine and feminine uh expressions of Mars, you just now described how Aries expresses itself, and then how Scorpio expresses itself. Because Aries is the masculine side of Mars, and then uh Scorpio is going to be the feminine expression of Mars. And so you can do that. You can do that also with Libra and Taurus, I suppose. Um, because Libra is giving something out in a very like expressive way. So it's a bit more masculine, it's outward, where Taurus can be seen as the more feminine expression of Venus, which is more inwards. It's used to literally feed and nurture, um, or to love the self. That's why when we talk about the second house in particular, we're talking about things like self-esteem, um, or what is yours. Um, and then with Libra, it's about the other person, you in a relationship with another person. So you could do that with all the planets. I don't know if that helps anyone out, or if anybody was ever struggling with, understanding that a little bit better. But if so, I always like to talk about those things, because sometimes like I still have my own, like aha moments, like even with like simple things like that. But with the elements, we have, of course, water, fire, earth, and air. And then for the modes, we have well, I'm just gonna go with the modern like modes. So you have cardinal, fixed, and then mutable. Um, just a little bit of reason why I say the modern version of the modes. So I do have both a modern astrology and a Hellenistic astrology background. Hellenistic astrology would name the mode something completely different, but they mean the same thing, essentially. Um, and all Hellenistic astrology is basically it's the more traditional, ancient way of reading Western astrology, um, where it's not modern astrology is more psychological, whereas Hellenistic astrology was what we use to track major events. It wasn't all about the person and their psyche. That's more what modern astrology has turned astrology into, and that's fine. Um, Either one, great, but just kind of like as a differentiator between the two, that is usually what the difference is. Um, so we talked about modes. Yep. And so then we talked about planetary significations. Um, so we talked about the things like Venus could not just be self-esteem, but it can also be shopping and cleanliness. Mercury could not just be someone that is a great communicator. It can also be someone that it can also be the process of making decisions or debating. Venus could be, or not Venus, but Mars could also be not only just like the soldier and the action of someone, but it could also be what really drives us as far as instinct to stay alive. So those kinds of things. Rulerships, we talked about like this actual planets that rule over the signs, and therefore eventually the houses in a chart. Energetic opposites. Energetic opposites will become very important in this course in particular. Um, they were important in the last course, but they're very important in this one in particular, because we'll be talking about the transits. And whenever you're talking about transits, like when we're talking about the solar eclipse that's coming up on Monday in particular, we'll have, of course, the moon and the sun will be in Aries. And sure, you could say, oh yeah, the moon is in Aries, and this is what that means. But we have lots of moons in Aries, but they don't always play out the same way. Why is that? It's because the rulership, or not the rulership, but yes. So so the rulership is the same. However, the energy where that planet, where the Mercury retrograde. Jesus, I can talk, I swear. So the actual energy of the planet that rules over that zodiac sign might be in a different sign than the actual moon is. So what am I talking about? Because I feel like I just said a lot and it made no sense. So right now, Mars, the planet that rules over Aries, if we wanted to accurately depict what energy this moon in Aries is carrying, we would need to look at where the current Mars is. So Mars is currently in Pisces. So Mars is not only carrying its own energy, but it's also carrying the energy of Jupiter as well as Neptune. And so you're mushing that all together and asking how would Mars express itself that way. And therefore, you know how the moon in Aries for this particular upcoming eclipse is going to express itself. Because you're not always going to have you're never, usually never, I won't say never, but you're usually never going to have the same moon, even if it's in the same sign, express itself the same way. Um, we talked a little bit about retrograde meanings. We're going to cover that again today. We talked about day and night charts as well as planetary sect. Planetary sect is day and night charts. And it impacts if you're going on more of like if you're going into birth charts more from a Hellenistic astrology perspective, I think those are important. They can be very important in general, but modern astrology just doesn't tend to use that. It is up to you if you decide to use it or not. I'm a bit iffy if I use it or not. I do see a lot of value in it, but you don't have to use it to have your interpretations be accurate. We talked about the 12 signs. Where do those come from? What interpretations can we get from that because of their planetary rulers that they have? We talked about aspects. Um, we've talked about the major aspects. So I don't really work with, nor do I cover the minor aspects, which are like the semi-quadrant, semi-square, things like that, because I just, not that they're not important, we won't say that they're not important, but I will say to me, the major aspects probably cover them. So it's like, because essentially they are almost the same energy, they're just on a bit less annoying scale, less noticeable scale. And so I just work with the major ones. If you want to go down the rabbit hole of minor aspects, God and Goddess help you and bless you. I couldn't. But I'm sure there is still a lot of value in it. And so I just personally don't see it. But that should not discourage you from, learning about that. It just won't be covered in this class. So let's see. Um, we are going to be also, so we learned how to put all of that together and read a full birth chart. So that is what we covered so far. And so we are continuing on from that. If my computer would go, why did no? Oh, there we go. Okay. We have vocabulary. So some of the vocabulary that we're going to be going over today, I think this is everything. I will try and not create more vocabulary that I haven't written on this list. So we have essential dignity. We have accidental dignity, and then we have the native, the birth chart, or just the chart. I'll probably just refer to things as the chart unless we're talking about like a specific person's birth chart. But since we ideally will be covering birth charts and transits in this lesson, I'm just going to make that differentiation. If I call it a birth chart, then we're talking about the person. But if we're just calling it a chart in general, I'm probably just talking about everything. But in particular, the transit. Um, and then we're talking about, of course, transits, and then a luminary. So let's start with essential dignities, even though it's coming up on another slide. So we didn't talk about this a lot. And to be honest, this is another one of those things that I don't find particularly important as long as you know what you're talking about when you're reading a chart. So essentially, essential dignities are, I'll just read off the thing because I have my own like little blurb about it on the actual slide. Refers to a relative strength or weakness of a planet or points zodiac. Ooh, did I make a typo there? Of a planet's or points. No, okay, I did not make a typo. Of a planet or point's zodiac sign position by sign and degree, or in its essence, or its essence. Um, you're fine, Michelle. The or its essence. And so basically everything we learned in the intro to astrology course is what an essential dignity is. Accidental dignity is everything basically that we haven't harped on a lot yet. So you already know essential dignities, and I didn't even call it that. So that's what I'm talking about. Like, you don't have to know, like, you don't have to say, oh, this is the essential dignity of something. Because in my mind, I'm like, when are you going to need to know that? Unless you're going to go like talk to a room full of astrologers at some sort of conference. You'll never need to know it. Because I guarantee you, if you take clients, they won't know what you're talking about. And you'll just waste your time. But if you would like to know the vocabulary, this is what it is. You will use the essential dignity, but you don't have to call it that. Accidental dignity is basically everything else that we haven't learned a lot of. It's basically what makes a planet everything extra. So it has to do with like asteroids, fixed stars. And does that add to a planet, or does it lessen um, a planet's power in the chart or not? Um, as well as what's called the Chaldean order. And the Chaldean order is just like, I swear it's not a secret society. It's just basically what planet is going the fastest. So obviously that fastest planet that we would clock is the moon because it moves every um, 2.5 days. Um, and it moves signs, sorry. It moves signs every 2.5 days. And then I'm trying to think. Then I think the next one would be Mercury. And then I think the next one would be like Mars, then Venus. I'll have to look it up because I do remember like there's an actual chart for the Chaldean order, but I didn't put the Chaldean order on here because honestly, once you start to just familiarize yourself with transits, you'll understand what the Chaldean order is, and you'll get an idea of how fast planets move from sign to sign anyway. Um, so I get this question a lot when I say what is like when I say, oh, like the native, and people want to know what does that mean. So it just means the person's chart um who we're like analyzing. So who does the chart belong to? It belongs to the native. If we have a name, then we can use their name. But like in cases where I bring in like client charts, I may or may not use their name. More likely than not, I won't. And I'll just say the native. Or if we just have an example chart that I pulled off of like a website and I just put in some random data, and I'll just say the native because obviously I don't know whose chart this is, but because I just made it up. And then of course the birth chart is a snapshot of the planetary bodies at a certain time and place divided into 12 houses and zodiac signs. Um, so just, yeah, remember that a birth chart is a snapshot. It is a still of what was happening when somebody was born or an event took place, because events do have birth charts. Um, everything technically has a birth chart, to be fair. Um, but yeah, so um, as we get into like solar return charts, I think that's also why I put just slash chart is because it's not always called the birth chart, but it's a snapshot essentially of what is happening at that time up in the stars. Transit. So a big difference between a birth chart is a snapshot. Transits are what is currently moving and happening. So like think of a bus. It is in motion, it is transiting something, it is passing by something. Um, a luminary. A luminary is any planet that yields light or gives light. So that'll be the sun and the moon. They give off some sort of light. The moon reflects back the sun's light, but it's still giving out some sort of light that we are able to actively see with our own eyes without the use of a telescope. So that is vocabulary. Any questions before we move on? Awesome. Okay. Oh, hold on. Yes, find your pet's charts. I swear you will be fully entertained. I got a dog, and even though I don't know what time he was born, I do know his planetary placements. So yeah, definitely look up, even if you don't know like what time they were born, look up like the day that they were born, because then you can get a better idea of maybe how to train or to reward your pet or to like like what they need as far as like just kind of personality, but also some of their needs maybe. um like I have a miniature Aussie doodle, and he's a Cancer. He's a sun and moon in Cancer. So ultimate mama's boy. But he also has Mars and Aries. And so he for until he got neutered, he was just like everywhere, very active, just everywhere. But then I think he also has like Venus and Gemini. So we get along quite well, but he is very mouthy as far as like giving me sass when he doesn't agree with things. So definitely look up your pet's charts. It is extremely illuminating, very interesting, entertainment for hours, I swear. You'll look at your pets in a completely new way. Okay. So if my I don't know what's going on. Well, I do know with okay, there we go. So we talked about essential dignities. So in basic terms, essential dignities is every part of astrology, the planetary position we've already learned about. So things like um where what the actual planet means. Like so Venus is going to be uh self-esteem, it can be women, it can be um now I'm drawing a blank, Jesus Christ. It can be it can be shopping, it can be the resources, it can be the people that come to kind of like come help us um in situations. It can be like it can be love and relationships and harmony. So those are some things like that would be called essential dignities, but so can um but essential dignity can also be like um where like what sign is that planet in. um so like if Venus were in, because where is Venus right now? Venus is in Pisces right now. Venus is in like Venus in Pisces is an essential dignity of Venus at this time. So if somebody had Venus in Virgo, that description is going to be what an essential dignity is, a part of an essential part of the essential dignity of that planetary position. um I'm trying to think what else. Oh, if Venus in Pisces is at like 10 degrees if you wanted to dissect what the 10th degree, how it might express itself with Venus and Pisces, then that is also essential dignity. It is basically what does that mean? What is that very basic planetary position? What does that mean? What is its essence? What is it saying? Um, and because Venus is in Pisces, as our example says, we say that that essential part of, since we know that Venus actually is exalted in Pisces, that strengthens Venus's expression, um, because it's exalted in Pisces naturally. And so it gives some sort of strength. As long as Venus is not in a Mars ruled sign, it does pretty well, to be honest. It'll express itself differently in any sign, but that's why I was also saying that planetary energy matters a lot, especially um, as we go into this, because while you don't need to essentially talk, while you don't need to say essential dignity when we look at planetary positions and transits, um, it becomes rather important to at least know what's happening. You don't need to know the definition, but you need to know what might make a planet more, a bit, what might strengthen it and what also might weaken it. Accidental dignity. Think of accidental dignity as all the accessories. It's all the extra stuff that really doesn't need to be there, but it's there anyway. So accidental dignity is a planet, is a planet gains strength for many reasons other than its zodiacal position. Accidental dignity occurs when a planet is well situated in a chart according to considerations such as house placement, due to fixed star conjunctions, or the speed of a planet. Okay, so X out what I said about the house position. Um, yeah, I think as long as you, for essential dignities, not accidental dignities, um, as long as you know, and we'll go over this obviously as we start to like do hands-on practice. As long as you know what these mean, you do not need to use the vocabulary for it. Um, yeah, so think of accidental dignities as all the extra stuff. So with house placement, think of like when we talked about planetary joys, where certain planets really like to be in certain houses, like Mercury has its joy in the first house because it gets to express itself more. So Mercury in the first house is going to talk a lot, or it's going to do a lot of thinking. And so Mercury is getting to do all of its Mercury things and express itself in a very Mercury way. And it's almost amplified through that house placement. But say that Mercury was like on Regulus in somebody's birth chart, that would create some extra stuff. That might be a mark of a leader, someone that people listen to, because Regulus is a fixed star that has to do with leaders, kings, famous people even. So it's someone that people stop and listen to what they're saying. But it's all the extra stuff. Um, Speed of the planet is taken into consideration. Um, Again, as long as you know what planets are moving faster than which one, you're fine. I don't want you to harp too much on essential and accidental dignity because to be honest, I don't. Um, and I feel like giving them a title makes things a bit more confusing because you're trying to remember which is which. I'm not testing you. Obviously, if you're in this class, you want to be in this class to learn about it. And so as long as you know what you're doing and it's working out for you, that's great. I've done my job. Um, okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the outer planets. Um, so up until now, we have primarily utilized the sun through Saturn to interpret charts. Now we'll add the outer planets. The outer planets are slower moving, hence they came to be associated with generational events instead of personal ones. However, they can be read in a personal way in the chart, especially if they're in 3 degrees of an angle, within 3 degrees of an angle. Um, so I think this part of the lesson, it brings up a really interesting, I think, debate on whether or not the planets, especially the outer ones, mean like just kind of have their meaning if they would have meant like the things that we put on them essentially on their own, or do we give planets meaning? And you'll see why, because well, let's talk about Uranus. So it was discovered in on March 13th, 1781, and it moves approximately 1 minute of 1 degree per day. So it's pretty slow. And it spends about 7 years in each zodiacal sign and takes about 84 years to complete a full zodiacal cycle. So it takes 84 years to go through it, takes 84 years to go from Aries all the way through Pisces and back into Aries. Again, takes 84 years. Um, and this is why I say there's a kind of a bit of a debate whether or not the planets just mean what they mean, or did we give the planets meaning, especially the outer planets in particular, because we got a lot of their significations from what was happening at the time. Um, so some of the things that were happening when Uranus was discovered was the American Revolution, the Great Hurricane, the rebellion of Tupac Amaru II. Lightning strikes St. Petersburg and sets a fire, burning 11,000 homes. The Industrial Revolution, the siege of Pensacola, um, invention of the steam engine and bifocal glasses was also um, created as well. So that was what was happening around that time that Uranus was discovered. And so what we attributed Uranus to was these kinds, like the essence of these events. So we've got rebellion, revolution, invention. Surprise, surprise, it's all the things that we talk about Uranus being um, associated with now. And we kind of keep, and as the years kept coming and things kept happening, we kind of started to pile more things on to Uranus when it was a bit more dominant. So obviously with revolution, you can't have revolution without some sort of thinking of the future. And so Uranus is also thought of as um, being that visionary planet, or the mad genius. It can, I guess, be seen as idealistic, maybe, even though it's more of Neptune's thing. But it's a planet that's associated with breaking um, through kind of like these chaotic leaps, saying that, something is outdated, or, that something needs to be changed. We need to go further, much like Uranus itself. We had been stuck in looking at the sun through Saturn for so long. When Uranus was discovered, it itself was a breakthrough. And so uh, it came to be signified with revolution, rebellion, insurrection, global and environmental catastrophes. So in particular, as we get closer to the Jupiter Uranus conjunction, that'll be happening at the end of April. In particular, in Taurus, I do expect to see probably a lot more earthquakes in random places, because like New York is very random, like it's such a random place to have an earthquake. It's not where you would expect, but that is very much Uranus. Um, Also, places have birth charts too, if just as kind of like a side tangent there. Invention as well as innovation and breakthroughs also became associated with Uranus. Uranus is the modern co-ruler of Aquarius, and shares significations of the 11th house. It is not the same as the 11th house, but it does share some significations. So the 11th house has to do with friendships, it has to do with allies, it has to do with hopes, dreams, and wishes. Uranus has to do with like that visionary energy of like breaking through to get to something better. It's oftentimes thought of as the higher octave of Mercury. Um, and so with Mercury, what are you doing? You're communicating. But who are you communicating with? The people in general. But if you take it a step further, you could say like people that you're connecting with people, you're networking. So that's how we could get allies. Uranus is not necessarily always going to be about friendship, but it can be about groups. And so that's why I really say that it's not the same as the 11th house, but it has some of the same things going on. And so I just want to make that distinction probably until the day that I die. They're not the same thing, but they have a lot to do with each other. So we're moving on to Neptune. So from
Oh, sorry,
here,
quick question.
oh, yeah, go ahead.
Um, since this may be a little bit of a stretch, right? But since it also was a time when bifocal glasses came out, seeing two different ways, and it was a new way to look through the sun, could that also be considered seeing two sides? Could Uranus also represent that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was like, I actually probably should have put that on here. Um, so we see this a lot with all three of the outer planets, especially Neptune in particular, because we didn't at the time know a lot about the outer planets. And honestly, like we, to be fair, still don't. We or like it's sorry, I'm gonna go so on a tangent here, like, and not too much of a tangent, but I always think about like Sailor Moon. Like in this aspect, think about how, like, if anybody's watched Sailor Moon, that like how those characters were portrayed that represented the outer three planets. It's something that is known but unknown, and so there is this two-sidedness that comes with all the planets in astrology, but in particular the outer planets. Um, they're seen not necessarily as malefic, but also benefic as well, because they have this great way of creating like this higher frequency something. But I think at the time that they were discovered, they were also associated with, like, initially they were associated with evil, and I hate to say that because we didn't know a lot about them. And they were creating and they were discovered, and therefore we made them be associated with um like some very negative things. So a lot of the things that we signify or associate the three outer planets with um have become better since we've learned more and lived more. But initially, all of them, it's funny, quite funny. They all were thought of as being these malefic planets that cause awful things to happen. And as we learned more and lived more, um, they became associated with other things, like Neptune in particular. I'm sorry, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I was like, because I was about to just segue back into Neptune. So I wanted to make sure I answered your question. So with Neptune, Neptune actually was coined as like mysterious because okay, sorry, my mind just went like in two different places. So with Uranus, it was initially of course it was called Herschel first, but also it was coined before it got its name Herschel. It was called the planet beyond Saturn. And we just kept doing that. And it always like tickles me that we just like kept doing that because in a time where we're in a time of like great discovery and breakthrough, discovering all these new planets, it seems like such a caveman way to describe a planet is to be like, oh, it's the planet beyond Saturn. It's the planet beyond beyond Uranus. It's just very um It's just very basic. And I was like, could we not get more creative? But I was like, it is what it is. But it always just makes me laugh that that's what they were called. It's like, yeah, the planet beyond Uranus was Neptune. And so, therefore, because it was beyond Uranus and they already had a planet that was beyond Saturn, they were like, oh, it's farther out. So it must be mysterious. And they had this same logic with Pluto as well, that it was even further out than Neptune. And so, therefore, it was also mysterious. So that's how we got the mysterious part of Neptune and Pluto, both. But Uranus just got the breakthrough because it was the first to be discovered after obviously, the sun through Saturn that we had been working with for such a long time. Neptune was discovered September 23rd, 1846. It moves less than 1 minute of 1 degree per day and spends about 14 years in each zodiac sign and takes about 165 years to complete a full zodiacal cycle. Some events surrounding Neptune's discovery. It was initially called the planet beyond Uranus, suggesting some sort of mysterious quality. The rise of socialism was happening. The Romantic era was also happening. The lack of political events surrounding Neptune's discovery was a big part of how it got a lot of its more like dreamy significations. Not to say that there weren't any political events that happened during that time. It's just less than others. Um, is what gave Neptune this kind of like peaceful kind of energy, like that we significant like we associated it with. Um, the discovery of anesthesia, as well as the rise of mysticism in Europe, was also how we gave Neptune some of its signification, such as mystery, idealism, compassion, mysticism, intoxication of drugs, anything that's liquid or associated with Poseidon and oceans, as well as spirituality, are some of the things that we associate Neptune with. I forgot to put on here um, the rulership part. Did I forget that for all of the other sides? No, I just forgot it for Neptune. I'm so sorry. Um, well, I'll go ahead and say it. So Neptune is the modern co-ruler of Pisces. While it shares significations with Pisces, it shares significations with the 12th house, it is not the same as the 12th house. Um, so the 12th house has a lot to do with isolation. It has a lot to do with endings and just kind of connecting with the divine. So we have some overlay with mysticism that we see in Neptune. Um, and just kind of being a bit more unseen, which we could see as isolated in a way. But it is not the same as the 12th house at all. And so that is Neptune. Any questions about Neptune before we move on to Pluto?
Just one, what is the co-ruler? Sorry, I was
Oh,
doing
no,
something. I missed it.
you're okay. So it is the modern co-ruler of Pisces.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then the traditional ruler of Pisces is going to be Jupiter. And then for Uranus, the traditional ruler of Aquarius would be Saturn. Um, Pluto. Pluto was seen, like I said, almost the same way as Neptune and Uranus. It was seen as evil at first, and then as we continued to live and learn, it was significated or associated. I don't know why I just like love that word today, significated, associated with things that weren't as awful. But I mean, we still associate Pluto with some pretty awful things. Um, but we see that Pluto was discovered February 18th, 1930. I also like how most of these planets, I think at least 2 out of 3 were discovered in Pisces season. Um, Neptune was discovered, I think, in Libra season, if I'm calculating correctly. Yeah, but I feel like there's a whole rabbit hole that could be done with that, but also the discovery charts of all of these planets you can look into. You can look into the discovery chart of all the planets, but looking at the discovery chart of planets can tell you also quite a bit about them. Like I think when Neptune was discovered, it was conjunct Saturn exactly. Um, which is why I will always like die on the hill of Saturn is not as bad as it is made out to be. It can be quite mystical. It just is from the school of hard knocks. That's all. Okay, so Pluto moves less than 1 minute of 1 degree per day and spends about 12 to 31 years in each zodiac sign and takes about 248 years to complete a full zodiacal cycle. Some events that were happening, like Neptune, because it was further, it was labeled as mysterious. It was also labeled as the planet beyond Neptune. Um, but also the Great Depression was happening, as well as World War I and World War II. Obviously, we know some of the huge things that were happening in those two wars. Development of the nuclear bomb also happened during that time. Um, so some significations that we get from that are evolutions in consciousness and matter. Both Neptune and Pluto got this very, I mean, Uranus got it as well, but it was more about intellect with a lot with Uranus and innovation since all these inventions were coming out. Um, but Neptune and Pluto were both seen as evil until they said, oh, well, it takes a very evolved human being to essentially make these planet significations positive. I'm not even kidding. That is what that was the logic there. So they were like, they're evil unless the person is spiritual enough to make them positive. Like it's ridiculous, but I'm like, okay, go off. But yeah, so we can see some of the significations of Pluto are going to be evolutions in consciousness and matter. Hades, the Greek and Roman god, um, is obviously associated with Pluto, but it's interesting because Pluto was actually named by a little girl because she just liked Pluto, the cartoon dog. And they did um, a naming contest for Pluto, and this little girl called it in. And so that's how Pluto got its name, is from, I think she was like in 7th grade. Um, yeah, very young child named Pluto. And that's probably one of my favorite like science facts ever. Is that a child named Pluto? Um, then we have riches. Pluto literally means riches, but we can also see that with that riches signification, obviously the negative side of that is going to be greed, but we also have wealth. What's hidden or underneath or underground. Speaking of underground, we can also have like criminals, so things that are done at night, things or people that come out at night with nefarious intent. Crime, corruption, scandal, as well as power. So obviously, not all of those things are bad. But Pluto still has a very dark kind of association with it. Um, but it also has some very good significations. Like power is not necessarily always bad. Um, Wealth is not always bad. It really depends on how it's being used. Um, Pluto is going to be the modern co-ruler of Scorpio, with its traditional ruler being Mars. And it shares significations of the eighth house. So the eighth house is going to be about death, crisis, taxes. Um, it can be about transformation, rebirth, which Pluto also stands for rebirth and transformation. Um, it has to do with the underground. So we could think about like what happens to things underground. Eventually they do get brought up, um, or like exhumed sometimes. Um, and so we can also think about Pluto being obviously the planet that talks about death. The eighth house also has to do with death, but it's not the only house that has to do with death. We've talked about in the intro to astrology class how the fourth house actually has more to do with death than the eighth, um, where the eighth house is more so death in a less figure, in like in a less literal way, where the fourth house can be like death very literally. But it really depends on what's happening at the time, whether it's figurative and literal. So don't panic if you're having a fourth or an eighth house transit. It doesn't mean necessarily you're gonna die. It could just mean something is changing. I don't know if that's like more comforting or not, but either way, we're moving on. Any questions about the outer planets before we move into the meat and potatoes of today's lesson?
Potatoes underground, like Pluto.
Yes, yes. Um, oh, I should have included like some like foods that have to do with each of the outer planets. I'll have to like do that next time. Maybe like add that in because that would have been a good one. Yeah, because even like oil, like the huge like oil situation that we were having, like when uh gas started like going up like at the end of not the end of last year, but like last year when like everything started spiking with gas, it all had to do with Pluto because Pluto rules everything that's going to come from underground, but it also has a bit to do with Neptune as well because Neptune's going to be anything that's liquid. And Neptune being in its own sign is anytime a planet is in its own sign, it's going to make things of that sign essentially it's going to inflate it. So like when Jupiter was in Pisces, we saw a lot of inflation, or even now when we have Jupiter in Taurus, things are getting more expensive. So Jupiter is expanding on Venus energy. So not only in a way where things are becoming um where we're in a time maybe of being maybe a bit more grounded or we're feeling because I'm like that could be person to person, but on a collective level, Taurus is money. And so Jupiter is expanding on the money. So while we might have see a lot of money coming in some way, shape, or form, we're also seeing a lot of money coming out. Um, or being taken out because I we had talked about when we looked at the planets, the sun through Saturn in the intro to astrology class that even though Jupiter is a benefic, it doesn't always do good things. Even though that's what benefic means, it does not always do good things. You can have an excess of fees. You can have an excess of cost, like we're seeing now. And so I am slightly I'm still a little scared of Jupiter going into Gemini because Jupiter does not do well in Gemini. So I'm interested to see how things go with Jupiter and Gemini, or if that just means that all of us are going to have to pick up a second job, or not, or just start walking. I'm very interested to see, but we'll see. But a fun fact is that usually when a planet is in its own sign, things of that sign or of that planetary energy do start to inflate. They start to grow. Um, or in a sign that say like when Jupiter was in Aries, the focus was like gun control, military, things like that. I'm not well versed on how much guns cost, and so I imagine Jupiter would have inflated the cost of guns or just at the very least brought more attention to it, which it did. But I'm not sure of the cost necessarily. Okay. So transits. The current moving planet is the current moving planet as it relates to a chart. Um, mm, mm, mm. Melissa said, yes, I recently learned that about Jupiter. I was shocked. I heard when Jupiter is in its is in a particular house, it may indicate an area of struggle. Yes. Yes. So depending on what house or what sign, even depending on how you're looking at it, Jupiter as benefic doesn't always do great things. The same goes for Venus, because Venus is a benefic as well. And so like we have Venus in Aries now. Venus doesn't do well in Aries at all. It's not because it's of the opposite planetary energy. So Aries is obviously a Mars ruled sign. And so Venus is Venus. And those two are opposite energies as far as astrology, not necessarily Venus and Aries, but um, Venus in a Mars ruled sign is very conflicting energy. And so what we often see across the board, Venus in Aries, while it will bring a lot of attention to self-care, um, care for like self-esteem, and just kind of being more focused on treating yourself or creating a good relationship with yourself, or spending money on yourself. It doesn't lend itself to very Venus-like things because of its Mars energy. And so so Venus likes to do things for other people. It likes the relationship of things. But Venus in Aries is more so about the individual. And so it's already conflicting. And so what we can see a lot is that we see conflicts in relationships because of that. Okay, so transits can be used to make collective world predictions, general horoscopes, as well as understanding the past, present, and future energies, and personal horoscopes. In every branch of astrology, transits can and usually are considered. Um, we're taking everything that we've learned up until this point to understand how to make accurate predictions. Note, it is hard to get a full view and therefore fully accurate interpretation of transits if there is not a good understanding of aspects. Please refer back to the aspects handout for the from the Intro to Astrology course. Also do my best to um, since we're doing pretty good on time to talk about any questions that we have about aspects if you have them. Um, Venus and Sag would, Melissa asked, so Venus and Sag would be conflicting as well, right? No. So Venus and Sag actually does pretty well because so Sag is a Jupiter uh ruled sign, and Venus is Venus. And so Jupiter and Venus together are just going to be expanding on Venus things. Venus brings a lot of love and soft things to Jupiter things. And so they actually really do quite enjoy each other. Um, we'll think about the relationship between uh Sagittarius and Libra. It's a sextile. A sextile carries the energy of Venus. Um, And so think about it that way because those are two masculine signs together. That's why I say those two, because obviously if you had like Sag and Taurus, that wouldn't make an aspect at all. It would make an inconjunct. But if you did like Pisces and Taurus, that is also a sextile. So those are two feminine, um, signs that hold the same energy. Those two love each other. They're besties, best friends. Um, and so Venus and Sag is a I think a fantastic placement. Depending on what you do with it, obviously. Yeah. Yeah. I was like every planetary position is going to do a bit of something different depending on one, the aspects, but also what the person decides to do with that. Um, you have the stars just tell you what the general energy is, what the karma of a person's life is, but you do indeed have some control. You have the control to make decisions about how you utilize the energy that you were given from birth and what you do with that and how you I'm losing my words, but basically, because I hear it a lot that people are like, "Oh, I'm an Aries," or "I have like this aspect in my chart, so this is just how I am." Um, and I honestly despise that because I'm like, "No, you're still accountable for for the things you do." The stars don't make you do anything. It's just like a snapshot of the energy that you were brought into this world with. But with all energy, there is a positive and a negative side, and you are choosing every day what you decide to do with those. Um, so yeah. Um, Venus and Scorpio would be conflicting. Yes, because Venus is Venus and Scorpio is a traditionally Mars ruled sign. And so, yes, Venus and Scorpio, Venus does not do super well in Scorpio. It can do some good things, but it's not where Venus is like happiest at. It can make things very steamy, um, but it's also eh, Venus is not having the best time there, to put it that way, because of that Mars energy. Um, okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about how certain transits per planet express themselves. So let's start with sun transits. So the sun takes about 30 days to get through one sign. So right now we're in Aries season. Shortly, we are going to be going into Taurus season, and there will be an energy shift. Right now, um, kind of think about the things that you see outside. People are a lot like I'll just speak to what I see going on. I see a lot more road rage, like, but that could also because we're having like there's just an Aries party in the sky right now. We have Mercury retrograde in Aries. We have eclipses between Aries and Libra, but also the sun obviously is in Aries, and so we see people maybe getting a bit more aggressive, more active. Um, People are wanting to do new things. It's the new year, uh, as far as the zodiac is concerned, not the actual calendar that we use, but as far as the zodiac is concerned, it's a new year. We're seeing growth or a very dramatic pivot in from going like in the weather. Things aren't as snowy or as cold anymore. Things have shifted in most parts of at least the US has started to shift into a warmer climate. um, Even if like we haven't really taken a sort of like foothold in that climate yet. Because in Ohio, we still have some cold days. But for the most part, it's sunny. And so we can see a lot of different things happening. But sun transits serve as the focus for the collective energy and bring focus and illumination to whatever house it's in. So if the sun is in the eighth house, speaking of which, so if the sun is in the eighth house, um, so did I talk about this in the intro to astrology? So I'm just gonna say this, especially since we're talking about sun transits in particular. So um, the sun likes to be seen. So we were talking about, I think, how like the sun does well in the 10th house because it's at the highest point of it's not the only place that it does well, but it does do well in the 10th house as well because it's the highest point um of the chart. Obviously it's not the planetary joy of the sun, but the sun does pretty well in the 10th because it can be seen. But the sun, however, does not do super well in the eighth because the eighth house is it's just kind of dark there. It's funny because I um there was a practitioner, and I'm going on such a tangent right now, but I swear this has like some merit to what we're talking about. There was a person that I used to work with, and she was also a Pisces. And um actually, no, never mind, because I to like explain the story like in full, I would have to use her name, and I don't know if she'll ever stumble across this video. So never mind. Never mind. But she had Sun in the eighth house, and it explains so much. But anyway, so um the sun just does not do well in the eighth house because it's just a very shadowy house. The sun also doesn't do its best in the 12th house. So basically, the sun doesn't do super well in the water houses. Because the other water house would be the fourth. It can do well in the fourth, it can do well in the eighth, it can do well in the 12th. But it's not like the best place for it. Um, especially in the eighth, because it just kind of it literally dims the sun's light in the eighth. Um, so okay, so sorry, I keep losing my train of thought. So when we're talking about a chart and the axis line from the first house to the seventh, the sun starts in the first and then it keeps going. And so right around like that 90-degree angle, it's in the 10th house. As it keeps going, we're getting closer and closer to sunset. So by the time it gets to the eighth house, it's getting dark. The light is literally dimming. It's not set yet, but it is dimming. So that's why the sun does not do well in the eighth house in particular. It can do fine in the 12th. It can do, who is calling me? No. Sorry about that. It can do fine in the 12th. It can do fine in the fourth. But obviously in the fourth, it would be nighttime, so it's not showing at all. So, just kind of keep that in mind. It's also not really showing a lot, in the 12th either. So, um, just like as a little tidbit of information that's not on the slide, just keep that in mind because that can also be really helpful when reading someone's chart, for interpretation purposes. So some things basically in that case would be a bit harder to achieve for that person. So people with sun in the eighth are usually they're very good chameleons because they're trying to constantly figure out their own personality. The sun can be about who are you as a person, what are your core values, but the eighth house is saying I'm constantly transforming. And so while they're great at putting on a lot of different faces, you have to wonder what's happening mentally with having to put on all those different masks and then taking them all off because you're just constantly having to peel back layers. And I don't even want to think about what that means for someone's mental health, having to peel back, constantly go through identity crisis. And so anyway, um let's see, the sun only moves every 30 days. Wait, did I read this already? No. So the sun only moves every 30 days, so it has come to be the luminary that is associated with more focused and stable energy. Another reason why it doesn't do its best in the eighth. If it's always changing, that's not what the sun stands for, and so it's going to destabilize some of the sun associations or significations. But that's generally what the sun transits do is they say this is the energy we're in, this is the same energy we're keeping until I move into another zodiac sign. This is what I'm focusing on. Even the house, if the sun in Aries is like your third house in your chart, not only is it focusing on Aries things, but it's focusing on third house things. So it's saying, for the next 30 days, I am going to bring up indirectly communication situations. I'm going to want to maybe indirectly or directly wanting to be learning something new or and like I say indirectly or directly because you don't always have to like intend these things to happen. When a third house transit of the sun starts coming up, it might be like you maybe you get promoted and so you have to go through training for your new job. You didn't plan that, but it's happening. And it just starts it just so happens to be happening while the sun is transiting your third house. Some sort of learning is happening during that time. Or maybe you decide, hey, when the sun enters your third house, you're like, hey, even though you might not be looking at the sun going into your third house, like, but all of a sudden you're like, hey, I want to learn a new language. Sun in a transit sun through the third house would inspire that. Um, or the sun going through the fourth would be like, I'm focusing more on my family. Or sun in the fifth, I want to focus on having fun. I want to spend more time with my kids, all this stuff. Okay. Um, and so it can be things that you consciously are aware of, and usually it is because the sun is your consciousness, but not always. It can be stuff that you just kind of fall into sometimes, just because life is life. But it usually does have to do generally with the sun transit. Obviously, there are other there are other there are other transit planets that are making things happen as well, and are not all at the same in the same house at the same time. Um, but sun transits will give focus and illumination to certain things of the house and the planets that are in that house, um, as well as like the general like zodiac energy of that house. Um, Sun transits bring more conscious focus to on action and action. Did I make? I think I made a typo there. Yeah, basically, yeah, I think it was supposed to be and action. More conscious focus and action. There we go. Yep. Oftentimes they do bring action in some way, shape, or form. Moon transits. Um, the moon moves signs every 2.5 days. And so moon transits bring emotions and change. It brings attention to more reactions rather than the sun brings attention to action. Um, moon is more unconscious or subconscious as well. Um, or just like very reflective energy, which is why I say that reactions are more of a thing for the moon than action is for the sun. Whatever house or planet the moon transits or aspects, it brings emotional undertones, um, or it brings changes or some sort of subconscious, um, yeah, a subconscious, like which usually comes out as emotions. Um, yeah, some sort of like subconscious like undertone to it. Um, so if the moon is like transiting your 12th house, maybe you're just a bit more tired. You don't know why necessarily you're tired, but you're more tired that day. Or those days that the moon is there. Or you're just maybe feeling a bit more reflective. You don't know why. You just are. Um, so that can come up as well. Um, Also, if the moon is going through like your 12th house, then you're probably going to be more emotional those days, depending especially on what sign is in that house for you. Um, we can even look at like the moon going through the fifth house. Maybe you're not only feeling more positive, but you're feeling more creative. So you might be feeling more inspired. Um, let's see. Let's bring up an well, we already talked about how emotions might play into that. Okay, so yeah. Any questions about moon transits? Moon or sun transits, either one.
Micah, I had a question like when you were
Sure.
back on talking about the sun in the eighth and the 12th and the fourth and where like I guess best has a it's more powerful where it likes to be.
Mhm.
So my question was like, does that have to do with whether or not the chart you're looking at is a day or night chart? Or is it
Yeah.
all
So it can. I- if the sun is technically like if so so if the sun is in the 12th or in the eighth, it's technically a day chart. It's debated on if it's in the 12th house, if it is even a day chart, because sometimes like depending on what side of the world you're in, people will say it's not a day chart because light isn't out yet. Because time-wise, it's the sun technically is out, but it's not, because it's above that horizon line of the chart. So it's rising, but it's not actually showing any light yet. And so that's another debate that's kind of like come up between astrologers, is if the sun in the 12th is technically a daytime chart. It's usually counted as a daytime chart, as is the 8th house is counted as a daytime chart, even if it's on the decline and it's almost sunset at that point. Um, because that would be like a time thing. If someone is born with their sun in the 12th or their sun in the 8th, they were technically born during the day. And so that would be a daytime chart. However, if they were born with sun in the 4th, that would be a nighttime chart, because the sun is below that horizon line.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Any other questions about the sun or moon transits before we move on? Okay. So Mercury transits. Mercury transits bring attention to the mind, what is being talked about, the tone or the energy around conversation. Usually we don't notice Mercury transits too often, except for when Mercury is doing that annoying retrograde thing, like right now. And so um, because usually it's all about our thoughts. So while the sun might bring illumination to maybe what we're thinking about, or like what we decide to do, or like what we're focusing on. Let me not even say what we're thinking about, it's what we're focusing on. Mercury talks about what are we thinking about, um, or how do we go about um, kind of taking apart what we're focusing on. Um, so say like this is a bad example because Mercury is currently in Aries and the sun is also currently in Aries. But since Mercury is retrograde, um, we're rethinking that Aries energy. So yeah, we could be very focused on um like getting more active, maybe going to like going to the gym, being outside, starting some sort of new project. Mercury retrograde is going to be say, okay, I need to rethink and not just do the thing. So maybe I either step back and I make a plan for like I make some sort of like workout plan before I start working out. Or maybe I go, in my case, it made me go back to an old gym that I used to go to. It could be like, instead of just starting this project, I'm going to come up with a list to um like make sure that I have follow through. So Mercury is more about like the small details and like the thoughts that are happening, whether it has to do with um decision making or not. It's just kind of like the thoughts that we have, our thought process, um, as well as how we're communicating with other people. Even with ourselves, communicating with ourselves can also be a big thing. Um, like Mercury in Pisces, Mercury doesn't do well in Pisces at all. And so Mercury in Pisces can create a lot of like uh self-deprecating thoughts. And I guess in its most negative way. But the other side of that could be like Mercury in Virgo, where Mercury is exalted, could also create self-deprecating thoughts. However, it's more productive and says, okay, this is what I need to fix. So, and this is how I fix it, through making this list and then like doing it. Um, and so that is, I hope that like, if anybody needs a better explanation or example, let me know. But I'll continue to read through this list. So Mercury can also bring up contemplation about decision making. Whatever house or planet Mercury transits or aspects brings communication of all kinds, ideas, thoughts, intellect, and decision making as well. Um, mm, 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 mm. Mercury retrograde transits often bring an inhibition of Mercury significations, such as delays in decision making. It can be delays in general. Retrogrades bring delays with everything, but Mercury retrograde can bring delays in communication, decision making. It can also bring miscommunication, having to reread or repeat yourself. Issues with paperwork or written and spoken communication can also come up during Mercury retrograde. Any questions on Mercury? Okay. We're going to take a 5-minute break because I need to get water really quick. We will come back for me, it's 6:40. So, for you guys, it's what, 4:40? We'll be back at 4:45. I'm gonna pause the recording, and I'm gonna turn my camera off. But wait, can I pause recording? I think I could pause. I could pause recording, but we're gonna come back in 5 minutes because I desperately need water. So I will see you guys in 5 minutes. Okay, so we are back. Um, so we are going to continue on talking about Venus transits. So Venus transits usually are not awful. I won't say that they're always good, but they aren't the worst. Um, there are definitely planets that the other planets I do think pack more of an annoyance than Venus does if it's going to be negative at all. Um, I think at most what you might see with Venus like retrograde is like breakups, but that is during its retrograde time, where I think you kind of expect to see some sort of issue with Venus like things. Um, and based on what other planets Venus is transiting at that time will depend on what relationships or like what's happening with those relationships or what's happening with a money situation. Venus transits bring attention to indulgences, relationships, social engagements, values, and women. The moon also brings attention to women, but usually we don't see like the two being taken into account together having to do with women a lot. Like, can it come up in someone's chart? Yes. I think I would take more notice if like the moon and Venus being together and like relating it to women, if like some other major event was happening, like if that was happening like during an eclipse and the Venus and the moon are making some sort of like aspect to each other, then I would say it could be about women. But if it's just like, oh, the moon is passing over Venus um that day, then the amount of time that Venus is passing or that the moon is passing over Venus is like a couple of hours. And so it's not as noticeable. Could it be? Could you have some issues or have like some really good experiences with women during that time? Yes, but it probably won't be as noticeable as with as if it were part of some sort of eclipse, because then it would be a bit more dramatic and we probably paid more attention if that were the case. But I did want to just bring attention to that um, since both the moon and Venus represent women in particular. Um, Venus transits often bring softening and understanding as well as opportunities to whatever house or planet they're transiting. So even like even though Venus and Mars are opposite planetary energies, when Venus and Mars are together in a good aspect, they create a lot of creativity. They create a lot of passion together. So it softens Mars's energy and makes it something beautiful. Some could even say productive. It depends. I guess how you look at it, because productive could be like creating a new sculpture, or productive could just be you just really taking time to appreciate a partner. It could be like just having a great time having sex. It could be all of those things, and it could be something completely different as well. um it would depend on the transit. But Venus transits often do not show up as negative, as negatively as other planets, planetary transits might. This is not to say that they won't have negative manifestations sometimes. It's simply just less likely. Um, so Venus retrograde transits often bring an inhibition of Venus's signification, such as reevaluating values, spending habits, relationships, breakups, creative blocks, issues or delays in receiving assistance or resources, issues with beauty products, and or cleanliness. Any questions about Venus transits?
Can you explain where the cleanliness comes from?
Yeah. So we were talking about in Intro to Astrology that cleanliness is a Venus signification, but I think that in particular comes from um mess is usually not seen as, or clutter is usually not seen as beautiful. And also that's more of like a Mercury thing, is like to have stuff everywhere possibly. But Venus likes things to be in order, harmonious, balanced. And so I think the cleanliness part comes more so from beauty in itself, as things being balanced, or well balanced. And so yeah, I think that's where the cleanliness things come, that cleanliness thing comes from. Um, and also, if I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, when things are usually clean, they also smell nice, which is also a Venus thing, because you're using like cleaning products of some sort. Um, and so yeah, that's a little bit of my own opinion, but does that answer your question? Okay, awesome. Okay. So then we have Mars transits. Mars transits often bring drive to lead and succeed, as well as action to whatever house or planet they're transiting or aspecting. The drive can result in conflict, power struggles, aggression, frustration, change, accidents, etc. Mars transits can also bring figurative or literal heat, speed, or severing. So anytime you nick yourself with a knife at home, you can blame Mars for that. Um, and so then we have Mars retrograde transits bring delays in action. Um, Ideally, because Mars on its own wants to react, or wants to act and do the thing, and go after something. Mars retrograde is going to suggest that you slow down, strategize. Can you just act during a Mars retrograde? Absolutely. It probably will not turn out well um, in the long run once Mars goes direct, because you'll learn that possibly there was something that you were unaware of, or that a better situation could have been made out of the situation if you had waited. Because Mars retrograde is asking to take time to reflect and to take on more of like a Mars Saturn energy, to take time and think and calculate long term about your actions. Um, Yeah, so it brings transits bring delay in action, as well as harsh consequences to quick or ill thought out actions, reflecting on current and past conflicts, frustrations, or wounds, and strategizing. Okay. Any questions about Mars transits? Okay. So Jupiter transits. Jupiter transits bring expansion, as well as understanding, jubilance, teachers, and belief to whatever house or planet they're transiting or aspecting. The biggest thing is that much like the sun, Jupiter brings a huge microscope to the house that it's in, but also the sign's energy that it's in. So Jupiter is currently in Taurus, like we were saying, and so it brings a lot of attention to things such as banking, money, how much things cost. It can also bring attention to what resources do we have, what resource don't we have. It can also be like something that I've really enjoyed seeing, not necessarily with Jupiter, but I am very excited to see how this plays out once Jupiter and Uranus are like that conjunction perfects at the end of April. Is Uranus and Jupiter has been changing beauty standards. Um, as it's, while it's been in Uranus. And so we've seen more body positivity or like a bit of a different perspective on what is beautiful as far as like body type. And it's come to more of this like universal like beauty of body type. So like yeah, body positivity has become a really big thing since Uranus has been in Taurus. And so Jupiter is just expanding on it. Um, it would expand on that, I think, anyway, whether or not Uranus is in there, but Uranus is bringing a more evolutionary, like revolutionary kick to that. But like when Jupiter goes into Gemini, I think like in May, um, we can see a lot of expansion happening, maybe like with how we're communicating with people, like through tech or like through cell phones or like any kind of like communication. So it doesn't have to just be pen to paper, but it can be like through cell phones or um through like the internet or like Zoom calls or something like that. It could bring a lot of attention and expansion to that. Or like lots of funding towards that. But because Jupiter is in a sign that is Mercury rules, and that's Jupiter's opposite planetary energy, it can also bring a lot of censorship or lack of expansion in that area. And so it can bring a lot of attention to what are people saying? Do we want them saying those things? Kind of thing. Um, and so again, Jupiter doesn't always do good things, especially when it's in a sign that it doesn't do well in, such as Virgo or um, in Gemini. It doesn't mean that it can't do good things, especially in a birth chart. I have Jupiter in Virgo. It's just not going to be as um, dramatic, so to say. And it also really depends on what if you do have like Jupiter in Gemini or Jupiter in Virgo, it also depends. You want to look at what house is it in as well. Because while it might not seem as dramatic in the sign it's in, it might be very like important based on the house that it's in. So like in my own chart, I have Jupiter in Virgo, which on its own is not that awesome or not that exciting, but Jupiter is in my ninth house. Like you could thank Jupiter in Virgo for while I'm sitting here teaching you guys astrology, because that's directly um, correlated to that Jupiter placement in my own personal chart with teaching. We have a question. Jupiter in Aries. So you just had your Jupiter return. Last year. Lots of stuff was going on. Jupiter just kind of flew through Aries last year. Lots of active, like a lot of things I think happened. It was quite an active time, even though Jupiter just kind of got in and out of there. It definitely was a interesting time. We saw a lot of I think a lot of new and exciting things, but also like a lot of negative things because it's a Mars energy and Jupiter's expanding on that. And so it was just a lot of action for sure. But I'm also not sure that's on a collective level. And so um, let me know if it was a very active time for you personally as well, because it would also depend on what house it's in particular. Jupiter transits help. Uh, uh, Another typo. I don't know why that little the little square thing is there. It helps to manifest, yeah, ooh, typo. Crap. I thought I would make it through this whole presentation without any typos. To manifest, it helps us to believe and view the big picture of things, to achieve goals. They can bring also bring luck and advantageous allies. So it can bring people to you that will help you build and make your goals into reality. Um, it can also have you not necessarily test belief, because that's more of a Jupiter retrograde thing, is testing belief, but it really says, like, what do you believe, so to speak, whether it's religious, whether it's just about yourself and what you can achieve. It really all comes back to that. So Jupiter, because Jupiter is just about beliefs. It is about like giving and generosity to others. Think Zeus. So other than pregnancy, I mean, if pregnancy is something that you are hoping to achieve, definitely look to Jupiter. If you want to get married, look for I won't say necessarily Jupiter transits, but you can look at Jupiter for sure. I think you need to look at some other planets as well um, in your chart, but Jupiter can definitely be one of the major ones because Jupiter does partially rule over um, marriage, ironically. But hold on. Third house Jupiter. Yeah, it was a lot of drama. um, yeah, it's so funny because I heard another astrologer say that the third house was kind of like the junk drawer of someone's chart. And honestly, being a third house sun, I resemble that comment. Like it's just like a whole bunch of stuff. But Jupiter in the third is going to expand on a lot of things. It's not just going to be expanding on communication. It can be like you're just kind of like learning all the things, but there is a lot of communication going on with people, especially if um wherever uh Scorpio is in your chart. So if Aries is in your third house, then that means that you're an Aquarius rising. So that would put Scorpio in your 10th. So I think I'm doing my math correctly. Yep, I'm doing my math correctly. Um, so yep, Scorpio sun in the 10th. And so that would relate that Jupiter. Um, so Jupiter would be not only correlating to its own placement in the third, but it would also relate to your second house and your 11th. And so it can be about like how, like conflicts with friends, but also like what do you want to achieve? Um, do your friends have like the same values as you? So it could bring up like issues of like, are we going the same places? Like, have we outgrown each other kind of thing? Um, yeah. Yeah, just a drunk drawer, indeed. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I loved when she said that. I was like, absolutely. The junk drawer of the zodiac sign. Or not the zodiac sign, but of the chart is the third house. But yeah. So yeah, and then we could even look at it from a different perspective. Um um let's see. Hold on. Wait, God. We have some comments here. Um oh, okay. Never mind. So um I lost my train of thought. But yes, okay. So junk drawer of astrology charts is the third house. So Jupiter retrograde transits bring reevaluation of beliefs, issues with travel, especially with long distance travel. Nervousness due to the unknown or lack of attention to detail can also come up during Jupiter retrograde, but it can also bring reevaluation of beliefs. Um, it can bring delays in graduation as well. Like if you're in school and trying to graduate, it can bring delays in graduations as well, or like completing something. Uh, got you. Gotcha. Interesting. Okay, yeah, no, then yeah, it would be right on the money for all of the Jupiter things, for like for beliefs for sure, and like absolutely. Um, let's see. So that is going to be Jupiter. Let's see. So then we're going to Saturn. Sorry, let me make sure. Okay. So we probably won't get to the practice stuff today. I'm so sorry. I talked so long. But we also did get started late. So I'm gonna go for just a little over. If anybody does need to leave, um, it's okay. I'm not gonna go too much over time, but gotcha. I'm not gonna go too much over time. I'm gonna go for maybe about 15 more minutes and then we'll wrap up. So we'll see where we get. We might just make it to the demo and then call it a day and then start back up uh the next time. So for gotcha. So Saturn transits bring foundation, maturity, growth through hard situations and limitations. Saturn transits also bring attention to long-term goals and planning, as well as balance, structure, self-discipline, weakness, and strengths. Delays, hard work, creation of long-term values and businesses. A lot of people start their own businesses during Saturn transits. Um, Saturn retrograde transits alleviate pressure, give opportunities to bask in our accomplishments and clearing of blockages. I like how, again, another astrologer puts it, when Saturn goes retrograde, it's kind of like when you've been working really hard on a project and then the boss goes on, the boss that has been pushing you so hard to get this stuff done, um, goes on vacation for like a month. And it is completely up to you to keep that same work ethic, because it better be done by the time they get back. But the pressure is no longer there. So all you're really relying on is and I mean, let me say it doesn't need to be done by the time the boss gets back. It's just kind of like the boss leaves in the middle of the project and they say, all right, I'll be back. But when they come back, they're like, okay, what did you do while I was gone? Like, and so did you do nothing? Did you just kick back and just kind of relax, or did you continue doing the work at the same level that you were doing it when they were there? So that's kind of like the energy of the Saturn retrograde transits. But Saturn transits are difficult for most people. Um, if you have a nighttime chart, they're probably worse. If you have a daytime chart, they're probably still difficult, but it's Saturn is technically within sect, and so it's on your side. And so it's a bit easier to work with if you have a daytime chart. Any questions about Saturn before we move on? Okay. Uranus transits bring instability, innovation, eccentric energy, thinking outside the box, unpredictability, rebellion, brilliance, and change. Uranus transits can also bring breakthroughs as well as catastrophic environmental disasters, humanitarianism, or attention to groups, especially minorities and ostracized or oppressed groups. It can also bring overthrowing of the government. Sorry. I mean, but it can bring overthrowing of like oppressive. So if like so think about it like Leo is the king, Aquarius is the people. If the people rebel, then they're essentially overthrowing the government. So think of that in whatever way you like to, whether it be the actual government or not. Um, but that's the energy that it kind of brings. Uranus retrograde transits bring attention to where we are being held back or oppressed, whether by someone else or by ourselves. It asks us where do we want to break through and how. It can also bring ease to settling periods in mental health. So Uranus can also be your nervous system. So Uranus has a lot to do with anxiety, as well as just kind of like mental breaks. So Uranus is not only going to be um, like earthquakes and breaks in the earth, it can also be breaks in the psyche as well. So Uranus not only has to do with catastrophic, like environmental issues, but it can also have a lot to do with mental health issues as well. Uh, okay. Any questions about Uranus before we continue? Okay. Neptune. Neptune transits bring dreams, deception, endings, connection with the divine. Neptune transits also bring clairvoyance, illusions, not illustrations, but also illustrations, because it can be art and drawing. Um, Isolation, imagination, and dissolving of situations in the house or by way of the planet they are transiting. Neptune retrograde allows for clarity, direction, opportunities for new beginnings to take root, creative ideas to become reality, as well as truth to shine through. Any questions about Neptune transits? Okay. Pluto transits bring upheaval, violence, transformation. Making Pluto sound so fun right now. Rebirth, power plays, death, paranoia, defensiveness, discernment, and wealth. Pluto retrogrades bring a time of peace or absence of crisis, or like lack of feeling like you're having to fight every day surviving. um, while creating something new, Pluto can also bring like just peace in general, mentally or like to your body, um, because there's not that underlying unseen fear anymore that's kind of coming up. Um, Building of wealth or measured action can also be another one. Um, let's see. Oh, any questions about Pluto?
I do.
Yes.
Would you say Pluto in the 12th house? Um, I know it could mean like a lot of things, but I know someone who has Pluto in the 12th house and they're a very difficult person.
Hmm.
Like trouble with the law, like trouble with introspection, trouble with accountability, just just
Yeah.
trouble in all aspects of themselves. Would you
Hmm.
say that was correct?
Yeah. The
Okay.
12th house we see a lot of a lot of Sag risings who often have that issue because
He's a Sag
Scorpio.
rising. He's a
Is
Sag
he
rising.
really? Oh,
Yes.
so he's got it double double like
Yeah,
twice
he's
over.
A Sag sun, a Libra moon, and a Sag rising.
Oh, so he just doesn't give a fuck about the law.
Yeah, yeah. And he has Lilith in
Oh.
the first house too. So
Um, yeah, no. So the Pluto in the 12th and Scorpio in the 12th can both like they can mean so many things on a good level, but on its negative side, it does bring out because the 12th house is the things that you don't see. And Pluto, as we already learned, can be like criminals, or things that are underground or things that you don't see as well. And if somebody really digs into that energy, they can have issues with the law, especially as a Sag rising, Sag or Jupiter in particular, that Jupiter energy being on the first house can be like law and order. Um, but there can be like this disregard or this bucking of like of respect of those things in particular, especially if Pluto is making some sort of aspect to Jupiter, like hard aspect to Jupiter. So I don't know if you know where their Jupiter is, but yeah, alone, Scorpio in the 12th can definitely suggest. I've heard of quite a few people who have friends that are either Sag risings or have Pluto in the 12th, and they have had the same experience that your friend has had. Like they have issues with the law, or they've been in and out of jail quite a bit. Okay. All right. So we're gonna do probably not trans practice today, but I am gonna go through a demo of what we will go over next time. And then we'll go over homework based on the demo. Because we didn't really get to do practice today, I am saying that there's homework more so because I just kind of want you to review what we've gone over today. So if you took notes, just review the notes so that it doesn't, go out your mind by the time that we come back next month, because I'm only doing one class a month. So I just want everything to stay fresh in your mind. So for transit practice, I'm just going to be doing the demo since we only have 10 minutes left. Up until now, we've briefly touched on how to read transits on their own. However, let's review reading transits on their own without a birth chart. In the following slides, I'll have 4 charts of historical events. Can you guess the events? We will discuss after each event is revealed. So this was more like meant to be a game. So the demo is the first example. Um, and I prefer a little bit of both. So Placidus and whole sign. I like both. I honestly, when I'm reading for clients, I switch between both. Um, I think if you start out with Placidus, whole sign, um, understanding how all the houses kind of link together makes reading whole sign not necessarily a lot easier, because if you started out with whole sign, it would still be easy. However, Placidus, I think, is the messier of the two because it meshes things together. Um, and so I think starting out with Placidus does give a bit of an edge, only because you're reading two different signs, multiple signs in the same house at a time. Um, and so, but I switch between both when I'm reading for clients in particular. Um, and so yeah. So the demo, so this is a chart. Honestly, I forget what I think I remember what event this was, but I don't remember, if I'm being completely honest. But this is, I put over here like some tips. You don't have to do it this way, but there's just like some tips on how I would go about this. So first, interpret the ascendant of the chart ruler, the chart of the ascendant and the chart ruler first to get a base understanding. So whatever this event was, it was a Sag rising. So Sag risings are going to be, I read events just like I read people. And then, so after I've read it, I just take it out. After I've read each part of the chart, I just take the personalization out of it, and say this event was. If I were reading this as a person, uh, it'd be a Sag rising, and it would be, so it can be about like, that's about beliefs, religious undertones, maybe. Um, Expansion would be a big one that I would say, or giving something to the people. Jupiter is in the whole sign, 8th, and so it can be like what. I think I actually remember what chart this is. Yes, I know what chart this is. So it's remembering, or it's like, what do I need from someone else? Um, And the AC is also at, this is, we did talk about degrees a little bit in Intro to Astrology, but this is 8 degrees also can be very much a Scorpio energy. And so it's like some sort of rebirth of something, a rebirth and expansion. So that's kind of like what I'm getting, especially because the chart ruler is Jupiter. It's in the 8th house and it's at a 5. So there's something new happening. There's something being birthed, literally. um, and so then I would move on to, so we already have this 8th house, very moon-like pregnancy kind of energy going on with Cancer in the 8th and Jupiter at a 5, which I attribute to Leo. It could be new leadership, but also the birth of new leadership, and expansion, or taking from someone else, to create something new. Um, and then so the next one is like what houses other than the AC does the chart ruler rule over? Jupiter rules over the 1st house, but it also rules over the 4th house, which can be about real estate. It can be about your roots. It can also be about the past as well. Um, Pisces doesn't really have a form. And so it's something that is trying to possibly, like, it's very mystical. It's not seen much, but it also can be about a lot about travel overseas. Um, and so it could be about, but the 4th house can also have a lot to do with like patriotism in particular. But uh if I were also looking at like that from the 8th house Cancer perspective, it's like, where is home? Um, and I am trying to establish new leadership in home. I'm trying to birth new leadership. Um, are there any planets in their joy, exalted, or in their detriment or fall? So basically, I'm looking at the so the moon is technically in a Saturn ruled sign. So we could say, even though the moon isn't in Scorpio, it's not in its best place, but I'm not going to count that as being like a negative necessarily. It's not the best place for the moon, but it's not horrible either. Mars in Gemini is fine. Venus, Cancer, fine. Jupiter in Cancer is great. Something literally is being birthed here. Um, Sun in Cancer is good. Mercury in Cancer, retrograde. I mean, it's good. It's not awful. Neptune in Virgo. Saturn in Libra is exalted. Saturn is exalted in Libra, and it's in the 11th house. Something is literally, there's some sort of partnership. Saturn in Libra on its own puts a lot of stress on partnerships, which we already have a sense of. There's some sort of joint like resources happening that is being broken away from. So it could put a lot of stress on that, because that is also that Saturn is in Libra. However, we see that crap, I lost my train of thought again, because I was like, my mind just went like 1,000 miles per hour. Um, Oh, because Saturn is, yes, Saturn here is here in the 11th house, but you know what sign Saturn rules over? Both the 2nd house and the 3rd house. So it's like resources, our resources versus everybody else's resources, and breaking out of that, because Saturn also rules over the 3rd house where the moon is. And so it's literally some sort of breaking out from other people's resources, breaking of a relationship to create something new. Then, so I'm moving on. So look for any stellium. So we have a stellium in the 8th. Um, yeah, because we have 3 planets. A stellium is going to be 3 or more planets. So we have 4 planets in the 8th. Also Mercury is retrograde, so there's some sort of reworking of what does it mean to take from others to nurture ourselves. Should we be taking those things, or should we not? Um, Sorry, I'm kind of like rushing through this, but you get the gist. Look for stelliums without interpreting all the planets of the, okay, so yeah, I just did that. I didn't interpret every planetary position in that stellium. But I'd say first just interpret those house significations. So the eighth house is about other people's resources, it's about taxes, but it's also about crisis. With Cancer there, it can be about restrictions with what is home or security as well. And then add in the zodiac sign, the planetary placement in that sign in that house. For the sake of time, I'm not going to do that today because I think I actually already did that. Um, yeah, I already did that. And then finally ask what houses these planets rule over. I had done that also. Crap. So never mind. I just switched to the answer, but pretend you didn't see that. Um, Finally ask what houses the planet rule over. Are there any common themes that keep showing up within the placements? Okay, so I said that breaking out from other people's resources is kept coming up. Some sort of stress on a relationship is coming up, but also the want to expand and birth something. So if you did not see the answer already, this is the Declaration of Independence, aka the birth chart of the US. That is the birth chart of that is this event's birth chart. Um, and so you can see how even though it's an event, we still got some of the very key parts of that event. Even though it's not a person, like each event still has its own birth chart, and we can still read the energy of that birth chart to see what might have caused that astrologically to happen. From the Mercury retrograde to reevaluating and maybe even drawing up a literal piece of paper saying this is like a contract, this is what we are setting up for ourselves, to be taken away from another country, to have our own independence and birthing a new country. We can see all of that through the birth. So that is what we are going to be focusing more so on next week, because you guys will have a chance to do that next week. Do we have any questions? I'll cover homework, but do we have any questions before we log off for tonight?
Not to, I don't know if it's really a question, but before you started explaining everything, I
Mhm.
actually thought this could have been like when women got the right to vote. Because
Mm,
yeah, it felt like with how you explain Scorpio and Sagittarius being in the 12th and first house like that, like not caring
yeah,
about about higher ups, and um the moon being a feminine planet in Aquarius, which is already rebellious
yeah,
and mindful of what they want and how to on bad side like manipulate others, kind of,
yeah,
how to get in the minds of others to get what you want. And with Aquarius and Cancer, just a lot of feminine energy with the sun there too, like really look at me type.
yeah.
Is that like a bad way to think of it too, or
I don't think so that's a bad way to think of it. I think it's accurate. I think, yeah, I think either way you spin it, it is like some sort of breakout, I demand my freedom, I demand my rights kind of energy. Um, I can't remember if I have any like women's rights birth charts on here or not, but we'll see next month. Or you could just look on the PowerPoint that's on the on the thing. But okay, so let's any other questions before we move on to uh homework. Ah, Okay. So I'm just going to show this as is because or else it's going to take me all the way to the first one, to the first slide. So I only really want you to, since we weren't able to get through everything, just track when, so like Mars is moving into Aries on the 20, it's not on the 25th. No, because that's when Mercury finishes his retrograde. I think it's on the 22nd, I think. Basically, I want you to track when the sun moves into a new sign, when the moon moves into a new sign, or just take notice. If you don't want to journal about it, just take notice of what happens at that time. If something big happens, please write about it so that you can share it with us. You don't have to share it with us for the next class. You can just keep it for your own reflections. I won't ask you to. I will ask if anybody wants to share, but you don't have to share it if you don't want to. But I know that obviously between now and the time that we'll meet next month, the sun will have moved into a new sign. So therefore it will have, by whole sign, it will have moved into a new whole sign house. The moon will definitely have moved quite a few times until next month. And then Mars will have moved again. And I think Venus is going to stay where it will still be in Aries. It'll probably be at the end of Aries by the time we see each other next. But just keep in mind when those decide to move, and if you notice a shift on each, in particular on the day that they move, how the energy shifts, what is happening around you. Like, do you see any differences? Like when Mars moves into Aries, are you feeling like you have more direction with your projects, or are you feeling like you have more energy, more initiative to do the things that you're supposed to be getting done? When the sun moves into Taurus, are you feeling like you want to just be out on a beach somewhere, creating art? Are you feeling like you just want to veg out and watch Netflix? Like, what's happening? Um, and keep in mind like what houses those transits are happening through. So you don't need to necessarily do like a whole journal thing, but I want you to keep track of necessarily how the energy changes. What are you focused on during that time, rather than what you were focused on now. So journaling might be a good way to kind of like keep track of that. But if journaling is not your thing, I'm not going to force you to, because God knows I am not great at being consistent with journaling. So, but I'm just asking you to keep track of the energy and some of the differences that you see happening. So that is class. And I'm gonna stop sharing here. So thank you everyone for coming today. And I will see you guys next month.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.